Thank you, Howard, and thank you, Questors. Cheers. I feel really quite intimidated following on from the Minack and Regent's Park Open Air, both of them fantastic venues. I was lucky enough to actually direct something at the Minack back in 2015 and had a fantastic time. I'm a director, mostly in amateur theatre, been directing for about 20 years. I do some work with the Questors, and also for the last 20 years or so, I've been doing some work with Putney Theatre Company, who are based out of a small venue called Putney Arts Theatre, which is down in southwest London. It's a converted church, main house with about 150 seats and a 50-seat studio theatre. I was artistic director there for a stint from 2010 to 2013. And at the time I'd heard that back in the mists of time, 20 years previously or more, the youth group had used a small outside space near the theatre to do some open air productions. I've always loved open air theatre. I grew up in rural Herefordshire and had some experience with that. I thought, wouldn't this be a marvellous extra thing for us to be able to do? Can we do summer outdoor Shakespeare? The little space is called the Putney Old Burial Ground. It's probably a couple of acres in size, a small public park with walls on pretty much all four sides, right in the middle of Putney, about 50 yards from the theatre, so no distance at all. And that allowed us to do something that is really about as inexpensive and low risk as it's possible to be in outdoor theatre. And I guess the kind of thing that most companies could do if they've got an open green space nearby. We use the burial ground because it's close by. However, it's called a burial ground because it used to be an 8th century burial ground, but apart from a few scattered tombstones, you wouldn't be able to tell that at the moment. It doesn't really look like a graveyard. It's just a green space with a lot of big, spreading, attractive trees in it. The way we weren't able to run any powering, and therefore from the start, there was no question of doing evening performances. They had to be matinees. We started off having an indoor production that would then transfer outdoors for a weekend, and then that gradually became 2 weekends. And in fact, this year we will be doing a production that is purely outdoor. They're matinees. There is, of course, as I say, no lighting, no sound. All of that has to be done live. So sound-wise, we're dealing with live music, which I feel always adds something to an outdoor production anyway. And you can use techniques like Foley, out of which you can get great comic value. The Old Burial Ground is a park which, brings with it a particular set of difficulties. For starters, you need permission. If it's owned by the local council, you need to get permission from them, and you need to go through their licensing department. It costs a certain amount of money. We pay a few £100. We have a limit of 100 people on the space that we can use. We can't close it to outsiders because it's a public park. Anybody can walk in at any time. We are fortunate in that space in that it's only got one access point through a gate, which means that we can steward, it's shepherd people in. Our stewards gently discourage people from entering the park while the performance is going on. If people want to sit in other parts of this little park, sort of outside of the action, then they can and they do. I think over the years, we've only had a couple of problems we had one belligerent and difficult person at the gate. Actually, unpleasant though that was for the stewards, that didn't actually affect the performance at any point. And at one point, we did have a little bit of a problem with some drunks who had taken up position in the Old Burial Ground and didn't like moving when we were rehearsing. But Court Parks Police did help us a little bit there. So licensing and permission, I would say just, start early. It can take some time to get the relevant permissions. You need somebody who's dealing with the council, dealing with the paperwork, and making sure that ultimately things like risk assessment are done. We do a litter pick when we arrive. The The old burial ground is not always in a particularly great state in terms of cigarette ends and cans of beer cans and whatever else. I won't go into all the details, but the cast arrive early and do a litter pick. We have our own, because it's so close to the theatre, we don't have to worry about things like toilet facilities, which would be a problem if you were too far away. That's something that we've got dealt with. You can simply go back to the theatre, it's a few yards away. Other things, outside we create a very minimal infrastructure. There's usually a marquee, which we put up in the corner of the burial ground where the cast can be based and can go and change their costumes and so forth. A certain amount of storage is done at the theatre, but on site, the marquee is effectively the backstage area. When people are not in there, they are visible and they are therefore in character. And you can have a lot of fun with the fact that you can see the actors moving into position. They will have to start acting sometimes 100 yards away from their entrance. And so that if the audience happens to glance in their direction, they're already in character. We don't do that many performances. I think we started off with a weekend a year. We now do a couple of weekends a year. We have considered more than one performance in a day, but get on to acoustics shortly, and that is part of the reason why we don't, is because we aren't mic'd, and Putney is on the flight path of Heathrow, and there are big trees overhead, so if the breeze gets up, there's an awful lot of noise from those. So all of the actors have to belt their lines loudly at all times. It works extremely hard on the voice. Having done a couple of performances, an actor out there, it requires an enormous amount of energy. You come off twice as exhausted as you would in a conventional theatre production. It requires an enormous, I think all outdoor theatre requires a huge amount of energy from the performers, but the more noise there is, and if you're unmiked, then that is really a consideration. Vocal warm-ups are an absolute must, otherwise people immediately trash their voices. And I mean, I have a little exercise when I'm directing where everybody stands right across all the actors spread out to all the bits where the audience would be. And I get each of the actors to say a line. Everybody has raised their hands. And as soon as that actor becomes inaudible to one of those people, they put their hand down. So you can tell just by looking around you when you speak how far your voice is carrying clearly at any given time. And that's one of those little things that we've learned in the years that helps actors who are used to studio theatres to know just how hard they've got to work. Aging wise, we've actually, for the most part, done a traverse. There's a path that runs through the middle, and we actually put our audience on either side of that, so the performers perform through the audience. Entrances and exits are largely a matter of our choice. If we want somebody coming on through the audience, they can come on through the audience. And that, in fact, I think it creates a greater connection, allows more audience interaction. Of course, one of the great fun things about outdoor theatre is your connection with the audience. We have at times introduced elements of promenade to get the audience up, move to another part of the burial ground. The production behind me is As You Like It. I mean, As You Like It is a wrestling match. And we couldn't do the wrestling match on the path that runs through because the surface is too high, somebody would break their back. So we moved the audience, we encouraged the audience to form a ring on one of the greener and softer areas of the burial ground so that the fight could take place within it. And actually, I think people rather enjoyed that as a one-off. I didn't expect them to be easy to move, but actually tend to be relatively enthusiastic about doing that, at least on a one-off basis. I don't know if it would be easy to do that many times during a performance, but certainly for that it worked. Weather has not generally been a problem for us, fortunately. Working during July and August for the most part. We've had one small rain interruption, which was a pause, as Andy described. We took a pause for the rain to pass over and then started up again. I think Other things that might be worth talking about: play choice. If you've got to shout everything out, then frankly, things with a lot of subtext aren't going to work for you. It's going to be very difficult to do Terence Rattigan in the open air. Everybody's got to be constantly bellowing the lines at the top of their lungs. We find that Shakespeare does work well. This year I'm doing a restoration comedy, and also not having to pay for rights reduces your risk on all these things, certainly in these times when sometimes we've started, as with last year's production of Twelfth Night, not knowing if we'd be able to go on at all, and finding that we could. As a bonus, if you're not paying rights, then of course you're not risking any money. It does help to have some, however, that is you can make quite energetic and colourful and find the funny. As we always say, we usually cut things down. Shakespeare's no more than 2 hours, often less. Last year's Twelfth Night, which was in COVID circumstances, we didn't want to have an interval, so people wouldn't go back to the theatre to go to the toilet during the interval. So we cut Twelfth Night down to 1 hour and 10 minutes and played that straight through. It's doable, and it's actually quite fun. And we don't get so many problems then with people, getting sunstroke, etc. That wouldn't be a problem, partly because the trees and the shelter. So pick a play that suits you, I'd say. I'm looking down my list of things that I was going to cover. Oh yeah, with the audience, we don't have seating. So we get people to bring picnic blankets and picnic chairs. If you see behind me, there's a little picture of. So we have stewards who will encourage the audience with picnic blankets to move front, people with folding chairs to move to the back, so that they will be able to see over the audience in front. Obviously, our blurb encourages people to bring a picnic and a bottle of fizz or whatever they want. It means that people with young children bring them. They can, frankly, go and have a little bit of a runabout in another part of the burial ground. It's more like a relaxed performance than perhaps a lot of theatrical performances are. We do provide a few plastic seats for people who are unable to sit on the ground but haven't bring one. But for the most part, people bring their own picnic blankets. Quick word about COVID. Last year, we had to do a socially distanced performance. That meant we didn't do our usual traverse with us in the middle of the audience. We had to play with a 2-meter buffer zone between us and our front row audience. We did continue to do our sitting on blankets thing, and actually we created small socially distanced pitches using those little cones they used to set out for football practice. So you can put your family's pitch there like you're on the beach. So you spread out your blankets and your picnic basket and all the rest of it, and sit within your set of cones, and your set of cones is a metre away from the nearest other set of cones. That took our capacity down from about 100 to about 50. And that, frankly, if we were paying a lot of money for rights, or a huge amount of money for hire, then that wouldn't work economically. But what we are doing is not risking any money, and therefore selling tickets at 15 quid a pop, even for 100 people, that brings a reasonable amount of revenue at practically no expense. There are a couple of other things I could say, but I'm now out of time. So if there's anything I haven't covered, I'll leave Q&A. Is there anything that I was going to cover in this, Jane, that I have missed?
The only thing you were going to talk about was risk assessment and insurance, but I suspect that can be covered by